The way politicians view climate change strictly affects the way the rest of the world does, beginning with America. America is said to be one of the most powerful countries in the world, but if we really think about it, is that true? For an example, the Paris Agreement was made to keep the global temperature rise to be below 2 degrees Celsius, which, when President Trump came into office, he withdrew the United States from this agreement. With that being said, it is clear that President Trump denies climate change. Not only does he deny climate change, but Senator James Inhofe denies climate change as well. He publicly denies climate change, and he wrote a book called The Greatest Hoax, where he explains why he denies climate change, mainly because of the science aspect of it and the economic aspect of it. The main reason why politicians deny climate change is because they believe that climate change is too expensive to fix, or they are just protecting fossil fuel industries that make $5.2 trillion in annual subsidies. Now we are moving on to China, and the president of China, who is Xi Jinping, met with President Obama in 2014, and they both agreed to curb both of the countries' fossil fuel emissions levels. This was the start of China's process to become a more green country. India is creating a step-by-step process to stop climate change, beginning with the South Asia Climate Parliament, which is a network of legislators who are dedicated to stop climate change by minimizing gas emissions, providing solar-powered electricity, installing households with biogas units to power clean burning methane stoves, and to create climate-smart farming techniques. If the United States is said to be the most powerful country in the world, how are all these other countries beginning their process of stopping climate change, but the United States is
Water,
doing
shelter, and justice are some of the essentials we need to survive and that we struggle to find. With climate change, most of our basic needs will soon be gone. The food source is becoming hard to cultivate because of wildfires, extreme weather, short and longer periodic seasons, and water shortages. This is due to the CO2 that is both stored on land and in the air. Yale studies show that longer periodic seasons tend to have its own advantages, but shorter periodic seasons don't always meet the status quo and bring ruined soil and ruined crops. Our water resource is also changing places near the Colorado River by creating droughts. Stanford studies show that when the temperature rises, the conditions worsen the droughts. Studies in water footprint say that because of the CO2 that is being released into the atmosphere, mountain glaciers and snowpacks are melting at an unprecedented rate. This causes places like Florida to have floods due to water level rising because of the ice melting in our ocean. Our shelter is also being affected because of harsh weather conditions like tornadoes and hurricanes, as well as wildfires and floods. An example would be Australia, who had wildfires that affected both human life and the plant and animals that give us life. Also, because of overpopulation in states like the US or China, two of the main contributors to overpopulation who house many of these people. Justice is also being affected because conservative Republicans fail to see the importance of climate change and its effect on their own environment.
Third world versus first world, and the rich versus the poor. The first world consists of the United States, Western Europe, and their allies, which are all considered industrialized capitalist countries. The second world was the former communist bloc consisting of the Soviet Union and some countries in Eastern Europe. The remaining nations, which aligned with neither groups, are considered the third world, which make up 9% of the world's population. The world's richest 1% have more than twice as much wealth as 6.9 billion people. Almost half of humanity is living on less than $5.50 a day. The unpaid care work done by women is estimated at $10.8 trillion a year, 3 times the size of the tech industry. Unpaid care work is defined as the production of goods or services in a household or community that are not sold in the market. According to Oxfam International, men own 50% more of the world's wealth than women, and the 22 richest men have more wealth than all the women in Africa. To leave off with a question that is quoted by Forbes: what is more important to these hundreds of millions of people? That they are no longer starving, or that the wealth of multimillionaires and billionaires may have increased to an even greater degree than their own standard of living? When it comes to the climate change portion, many might think that it's the first world countries that are doing the best they can, but that has not been proven and not actually all the way right. When doing research, it was the third world countries that came on top with doing what they can do to keep their country and their people alive. They use solar panels, they're trying to reduce the use of carbon, they're working on their greenhouse gases and stuff like that. But what is the United States and Europe and other places doing? The question will always be, are we all doing enough so that in the future we can be safe? The reason that maybe the United States is not doing as much as they should is because many of the people in office honestly think that the economy is more important than human lives.
So I think what a common misconception is that a lot of people don't realize that with climate change, it's more of a collective thing. It's such a big task. We don't realize that, or I guess you could say that some people feel like it's beyond us. It's too big of a task for anybody to really actually get anything accomplished. So the whole idea is like changing that view on climate change and basically not feeling helpless in the whole situation, because there's a lot of change that could be done like with climate change, especially if it's done collectively. Together, so much more could be done, so much more change, and a lot of things can, I guess, progress if people change their mindset about climate change. I know it's something that seems scary and a little intimidating, I guess you could say. But in order for us to actually make some like an extreme change, you will have to do it collectively, and that's including everybody, not just one country. And because I know that's an argument. It's like, oh, I think another problem is with us deciding what countries is being the top polluter and this and that, arguing back and forth and focusing more on the economical aspects of climate change itself. But if you think about it, if people understood the changes that could be made with climate change and like how it could affect us, they'll realize that if there's not a change, that we can have we'll have an economic change, and 2, we'll have the physical change. So when people realize that they start seeing the physical changes, they'll realize that this is something that has to be stopped in some way and soon, because otherwise then nothing will be done. Everybody, in a sense, will be destroyed.
When we usually talk about climate change, we usually talk about how it's affecting us in our everyday lives, which is crucial. But it is also very important that we talk about how we are going to fix and rebuild our entire planet. we talk about rebuilding, and the one thing that we really need is consistency with everyone. We take for granted our forests and we abuse them to just take their oils, and we don't take care of it as we should because they provide so much for us. Talking about rebuilding can help you start a plan, but you can't start a plan if you're not aware of what's happening around you. NASA's Global Climate Change website can show you how much carbon dioxide is in the air, or how much the global temperature has gone up or gone down, or the Arctic ice minimum, or the ice sheets, or sea level. Being able to use solar panels instead of fossil fuels can help reduce greenhouse emissions, especially carbon dioxide. Not many are fortunate to be able to have solar panels, but more schools should look into using solar panels because they do use a lot of energy and electricity. Simple things like turning off the light when you leave a room can have a huge impact on climate change. For example, if everyone is to turn off their lights every time they leave a room, a person can reduce greenhouse emissions by 0.15 pounds per hour, which might not seem like a lot, but if everybody is consistent with doing it, it does have a great impact. If we go from using cars to bikes, it provides a cleaner form of transportation. Now, it's evident that everybody won't be able to use a bike getting to where they need to, but if you can use a bike at least once or twice a week instead of using your car, your fuel emissions will completely be cut back. Also, producing a car uses way much more energy than it would to produce a bike.
The way politicians are viewing and handling this pandemic clearly shows how unprepared they are for emergencies like this, especially a climate change emergency. Being that Donald Trump is in such a rush to open the country, it clearly shows how he does not care about the well-being of his citizens. All he cares about is the economic status of our country. In addition to that, this situation is showing us how the president and our governors are communicating with each other during this time. They are clearly not on the same page. They are not communicating with each other, and it is causing the citizens to become very confused. It is essential that our government takes emergencies seriously and that they are on the same page so it can benefit our country as a whole.
There hasn't been a national shortage of food, but there has been a decrease in food restock because of excessive buying due to COVID-19. To ensure that there is access to food supply and resources, public health officials should work with federal, state, and local officials to provide an appropriate and effective method. Due to fracking not being taken seriously, like the beginning of the coronavirus, it can be shown that it will be one of the reasons that there has been a severe impact to U.S. water resources. A method provided to stop the spreading of the coronavirus is to wash our hands, but in places and homes where water has been cut off for non-payment, people are unable to do this. That is why our leaders have to ensure that clean and safe water is accessible for everyone and not just people in homes.
This pandemic came very unexpectedly and took the world by storm, with all the debts that every country is experiencing and all the sickness and everybody realizing that they don't have the necessities that we actually need to survive this time. The highlight out of all of this is actually what the third world countries are doing with completely shutting down their countries at a certain time, setting curfews to keep their citizens alive and healthy. But what are the other countries doing? What are they doing differently that is not working?
The coronavirus has placed the world in a very strange position. This pandemic has caused an extreme turmoil for those who cannot afford to stay at home and follow the stay-at-home order. As a collective, the best options for Americans in low-income households is to be assisted by our government. But how can it happen without a change of mind within our government? We collectively must demand our change. To many, problems like these are too big to handle. But to me, in order for us to make change, we must come as one and demand what we deserve.
When looking at the future, we now have to take into consideration COVID 19. And due to COVID 19, we have had a decrease in flights, and that has shown a great progress in our air, especially in China and Italy, that they have seen clean air, and the canals in Venice have been clear, and they haven't been clear in a while. But it has not been a great amount of decrease that we can see a huge factor changing. The emissions decreased by a maximum of 17%, or 17 million tons of carbon dioxide. And globally, that is the peak since April 7th. Continue with the ways we are with the pandemic right now, we would be able to see a huge decrease in climate change that would be beneficial to the entire human race. Taking into consideration that we would use less traveling, and also not using our vehicles as much, more using like bikes, or taking into consideration maybe getting vehicles that are green that will be beneficial to the planet.